Hello and welcome to the webinar, Finding Success in Your First 90 Days, hosted by Ethos Privacy and Divebell. Ethos Privacy is a leading privacy consulting and software company that partners with companies on their privacy programs, striking the right balance between privacy needs and business goals. Divebell is a B2B data security and privacy platform that helps customers discover, manage, and monitor valuable personal and sensitive data within their environments. They have a modern, lightweight, scalable, and secure architecture that can be deployed as an SaaS or on-prem or a hybrid footprint to scan structured and unstructured data on-prem or in the cloud. Please add your questions into the Q&A section or chat. It will make every effort to address them in this session. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Ethos and Divebell sites shortly. If you would like access to the deck being presented, and I think you might, please put your email in the chat or in the very short survey that will be emailed to you immediately following today's event. And now, let me introduce you to your speakers, Aaron, Grant, and Emily. First, Aaron Stevens is the VP of Business Development at Divebell. After joining the IAPP in its early days, Aaron went on to be VP roles at privacy tech platforms Sentinel and Asano, and currently heads up business development at Divebell. He's on the advisory board of the Rise of Privacy Tech, former chair of the IAPP Boston's KnowledgeNet chapter, and an experienced business development executive. His unique history over a decade of privacy sales gives him an interesting perspective on how to build and run privacy programs and what is really needed internally and externally to be successful. He holds an MBA and both the CIPP US and CIPT certification from the IAPP. Grant Barrett is a privacy director at Ethos Privacy, where he works closely with enterprise clients on data privacy strategy, developing business requirements, and program design. Grant brings a unique regulatory compliance and enforcement perspective as a former California Superior Court judge. In addition to a Jewish doctor, Grant holds both CIPP US and CIPPE privacy certifications from the IAPP. And finally, Emily Leach. Emily is the Privacy Content Director at Ethos Privacy, overseeing privacy framework analysis and creation for the company's privacy program management technology. Emily has been working in data privacy for 14 years and spending 11 years at the IPP as a manager of its online resource center and editor of the Privacy Tracker, among other responsibilities. Emily holds both CIPP US and CIPPE certifications from the IPP. And now I'd like our panelists to get started with our webinar.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us here today. We are actually going to start today's webinar off with a poll, so we can learn a little bit about our audience and can tailor our session here to your needs. So Karen, if you could throw that poll up on the screen for us, that'll give us a little more information to work with.
Is this where we play the Jeopardy music? Right?
Should be. There we go. All right. So it looks like we've got kind of a mixed bag here. We've got some new people to privacy and some people who are within their first days, which are not mutually exclusive. So that is really good stuff to know. Appreciate you all answering that for us, so we can just make sure we're being as valuable to you as possible. So as you know, you are here to kind of learn about the first 90 days of a privacy program. Here in front of you, you can see these are the elements that we're going to go through for you today: knowing your stakeholders, knowing your place in the ecosystem, your organization's tech capabilities, your program drivers, your basic controls, and then, of course, your priorities regarding privacy. So we will.
From that survey, it seems like 33%, if I'm not inaccurate, were told they have to be in charge of privacy now.
It sounds that way, yes.
Somebody was like, hey, the music stopped and there's no chair for you. You're in charge of that.
Hey, some of us choose privacy, Aaron.
I didn't say it was a bad thing. It's just a thing.
All right, next slide.
Oops. Here we go. Boom. Okay. Well, I mean, at this point, we've broken this all out. So we're gonna dive into each one: executive, sponsor, partners, and business. Well, that's covered up. I can't even see it.
There we go. Now I
There.
feel
That's
better.
better.
Oh, it wasn't
Perfect.
coming through?
It
Yeah.
did. It was slow. That's all.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, certainly welcome to all of our attendees. So one of the things that I'd like to talk to you briefly about here is kind of, who are the important people to get to know within your organization so that privacy can be successful. And we've broken them out into 3 groups: the executive sponsor group, the daily partners, those that you're going to be working with most closely to enable privacy, and then the business units, which are going to be those stakeholders that you're continuously kind of working with on data privacy use. So with that, let's go to the next more detailed slide.
Let me know when it's up on your screen there. Oh, we're up. Okay. Privacy, stakeholders and executive sponsorship. So this actually, in my opinion, and while yes, I was the first to go, I also think it's one of the most important things. The challenge that you're all going to face is that you are either creating a culture or building something brand new or something that everybody's kind of heard about. It's kind of been in the news a little bit, and you're now having to deal with figuring out how to make this all work. One of the key, in my opinion, one of the most important parts of this is the person that said, hey, you're in charge of this now. Hopefully they are your champion. They will be a key player in the entire process. They are going to be the one that tells the organization that this is either a new directive, new initiative, or this is something that's, extremely important now within the organization, hopefully. And one would hope that they're also going to understand that this is the organization has a need for privacy. One of the things that can happen is it could be a checkbox, which isn't always the best thing. There are organizations out there that know that they need to deal with PII, personally identifiable information, or PI if you're in Europe. But that they create all these policies or do whatever they have to do, but don't really back it up. That's a tough place to be in. The best thing is if there's an executive, someone in the executive team, hopefully C-level, that understands, and usually it's, well, it can be anybody. I've seen it be the general counsel, I've seen it be the CEO, but they understand the need for privacy and compliance. And then they basically put themselves in the way. They create the culture of privacy as far as, we need to do this. This is what we've assigned this person, you, to do this, and they are sort of your executive go-to. Anybody have any additional stuff on champions? No?
Yeah, I'll just add that it's a super important role. If you can get that executive level buy-in, then your chances of success are significantly improved, I will say. So it's a very important relationship to build and foster, for sure.
And I would just add that along with having that champion is the tie-in. You've got to provide a constant flow of information to your champion to keep them in the know about what you're doing and what you're contemplating doing, so they can support you and kind of break the wind forward as you go into the organization. That sometimes you're going to have headwinds, and if you have a champion who's informed and on board, it makes it so much better. So providing them reporting in a way that they can digest it in a cadence that makes sense for them, and through a media that they're comfortable with, is really important to nail down very early. because I can't tell you how invaluable it is later.
Well, that's great. Segue into reporting. It's one of the most important aspects. And as you're developing this, you need to sit down with your champion and maybe some other people in the leadership team to really define, and the more detailed, the better. I hate to say, because I'm not a hugely detailed person, but if there are very, very specific defined goals for the first 30, 60, 90 days that are attainable, it can't be, oh, go interview the IT group. Like it needs to be much more granular on where you want to be, and have check-ins with your champion and your leadership team on a regular basis of, this is where we are, this is where we want to be after 30, 60, 90 days. This is the ways that the metrics that we're going to use to follow those attainable goals. Okay. They need to be reasonable, and they can't be this sort of lofty, like, well, you know, if we're like this or like that, that should be good enough. It needs to be very clear and concise. And just to jump, that part is what the leadership is going to need to understand, because when you have defined goals that are granular and you meet them, you can continue to go down this path. As you'll see later on in our presentation, we have very specific steps or very specific guidelines on the right way, or a way, maybe there's multiple ways to skin this cat, but the right ways to get from being the new guy that needs to figure this out to having an actually really well executed plan of attack. And one of the things, and I put it as last for the leadership, you got to be really careful not to put the executive or the person that's your champion in as a, oh, well, the CEO said so, so you have to do this. That can totally take all the wind out of your sails, because people won't want to deal with you. They'll feel like they have to do this. This isn't a, I want to participate and I want to, you know, sort of join in arms to do this for the organization. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is human beings' information. So, you know, I always try to tell people to just step back and think about, if you are doing something with someone's data that you would think is really uncool to happen to you, then you need to step back and think about what's going on here. That's like the biggest part of this entire thing, is that organizations really need to figure out the difference between the business acumen and making money versus what's doing what's right. And that's why you've been put in this position, and that's why you've got leadership backup. You guys, before I jump on the budget, anything else to add to that?
Nope, go right ahead.
All
No,
right.
I think that's good.
Budget. Never enough money. You're never going to have enough money. It's the biggest problem. And this, to jump back to what I had said about using the leader as the parent, you are never going to be able to make alliances with other parts of the organization that actually have money. One of the things that you'll find is compliance and legal, not a lot of money, very little generally. And I'm talking very generally over organizations. But the IT department, security department, those guys actually have a pretty good sized budget. And at the end of the day, depending on what you're doing, you are going to need to work with these guys. You may not speak exactly the same language, though I will say that a lot more engineers understand the privacy concepts. I mean, there's actually things called privacy engineers now. Back when Emily and I started and Grant started, that there wasn't really a thing called privacy engineer, and we needed a universal translator for those two groups to talk to each other. But now they're starting to understand each other. And more often than not, they will work together to put privacy department will put policies in place, and then your IT department will help you fulfill those regulations or what it is you're trying to do. And then the other thing that would be really great if you have a strong executive sponsor or champion is to establish a reasonable budget for the privacy department or the privacy compliance department. And the nice to have would be the ability to have that be flexible. Things come up. When you start getting regular data subject access requests, this can be a challenge if they start to mount up, depending on how all of your tech is laid out. I have talked to some organizations, and it can take one single DSAR can take 10 hours. So that kind of lift can then lend to be nice to have a flexible budget. But that's pretty much where I sit with the stakeholder as far as champion, reporting, leadership, and budget. Anyone else?
No, I think that you covered it. I would just reinforce that you never want your champion to be surprised by something that's going on, either that you have as an initiative or a priority or instruction you're given, because I guarantee you that marketing or sales is going to talk to them. So they shouldn't be surprised.
And I would even further that point, that you want to, it'd be very helpful to get to know the sales team. The sales team inevitably is going to get the questions on privacy and data. Depending on the products that you're selling, there are going to be data privacy questions to them. The better relationship you have with them, the more you can, train them, the better that they'll be at explaining the privacy stance of your organization. And that's just invaluable. And one of the things I can speak to personally is it will help them make more money, which is always a driver for privacy.
Hey, sales is coming. You're jumping the gun.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. All right, ready for the next slide, guys?
Yeah, let's do it. All right, so this is the partners. And so this is where most of my work goes on a day-to-day basis. Most of my meetings within an enterprise setting are with these groups. Primarily these first three most often. So your partners on a day-to-day basis are generally going to be legal. Assuming that you do have some tech in play, you're going to have engineering teams, IT teams, InfoSec teams. Someone is going to be doing your technology enablement. And I would strongly encourage you to make best friends with your customer care. If you have a call center, if you have customer service, they are invaluable partners for privacy. So I'll touch on each of these briefly. Legal, obviously, you need to clear with them what the legal requirements for your program are. And it is appropriate for privacy operations to go to legal and say, and I'm a lawyer, but when I'm in an enterprise environment, I'm going to their designated legal and saying, hey, Colorado's got a new law, Utah's got a new law. I want to make sure that we are aligned on what the legal requirements for compliance are, or we're, operating in Canada, we're operating in Australia. I want to know what your legal requirements are, and I want some sign off on those legal requirements. Now, maybe that you have to offer it up to legal and say, here are these things, but you want to get sign off on the legal requirements. Legal's obviously the only one who's going to be able to make discretionary calls where there's privacy risk. Again, because they're going to be answering the regulators' inquiries, they're going to be answering up the chain in the compliance ecosystem. So discretionary calls are made by legal in almost every organization. What I call canned text is all of the external communications. So everything that anyone is reading about privacy, any messages that are sent upon receipt, on processing, on completion, on denial of data subject rights. Also, you're probably going to want to have some canned text to deal with the various privacy inbox issues that you see over and over and over again. I'd encourage you to build a set of template responses for these kinds of activities and have legal give them a once over and a thumbs up. Big thing is you never want surprise. Legal never wants to be surprised. They'll always be upset with you. And you need to build a good, understood, and agreed upon legal escalation path. Not everything should be escalated to legal. Sometimes you don't want the power of legal. Sometimes things get to legal and they say, make it so. because they want something that's come in through the privacy inbox to go away. That can create a problem within the organization if you're constantly, as Aaron was saying, you're turning certain positions kind of into a super parent. Then no one wants to kind of go to you with a problem if you turn it over to legal all the time. So having boundaries on your legal escalations and having an agreed upon kind of person to contact, give them, some selections within your capability, always a good way to work on your escalations. But I can't tell you how many times I've had escalations that have caused trouble for the rest of my partners. The engineering partners, they're going to give you the functional requirements, right? They're going to tell you
Can I add something to legal there, Grant?
Please.
One of the things, and believe me, you're an attorney and I certainly don't mean to offend you, but sometimes attorneys see things very black and white. I mean, straight up black and white. And in the privacy world, there's always this thing that people say, it depends. And not every single situation is the same. And my experience has been that sometimes, and just sometimes, legal departments are like, nope, this is it. That's it. And you're like, well, there's this circumstance. And nope, that's the way it is. So sometimes, even a couple of times, it's good to just bounce it off somebody else other than legal before you go to legal.
Yeah, that's my point about being a good partner with these other teams. Because from privacy, if you go to legal and you get the big hammer and it's not working for engineering, or it's not, I had one example just this week where we have a non-privacy state resident making a request to delete their data, right? So they're not within the scope. There's no legal requirement to provide it. The system wasn't built to provide it. It is an automated ingestion of privacy requests. And and the solution is state gated, meaning that you have to have a residency in the appropriate state to exercise the certain right. So this got escalated to legal. Legal says, just delete the data. Well, engineering is screaming at us because they're like, you're breaking our state gate. Customer service is screaming at us saying, hey, we deal with this all the time. We know how to talk people off the ledge on these deletion requests that are out of state. You've got to be a good partner and know what your partner's processes are. And they were not happy with that solution. So that's just one kind of partnership issue with legal. And that's why I kind of narrowed the escalation path to legal and make sure that my partners are on board, because day to day I'm working with engineering and the business. So again, the engineering, they provide you the functional requirements, which are, how do they see the legal requirements actually being achieved in your environment, right? So, because legal says, do this, provide deletion rights. Well, engineering has to figure out what that means and what it breaks when they delete data, and they're going to come back to you with functional requirements. Estimated levels of effort. They're also going to tell you how hard it is to make it so, and what other priorities it's going to impact. They may have an initiative. They may be moving to the cloud, or they may be moving to a new CRM, or there are all kinds of things that are more closely tied to revenue than privacy that may have higher priorities. And when you get a legal make it so edict, you have to work with your partners. Otherwise, your project's going to get lost in the sprint tracker. Oh, your story didn't make it. Automated processing paths. To the greatest extent possible, you'd like to automate some of your privacy requests. You're going to need engineering partners to help you with that and learn what can work and what can't work. We'll talk a little bit later about buy versus build, and you'll see a little bit of that, and that comes up quite a bit. And then technical escalations. There are times when you're going to need engineering to go into the back and fix something. I had a perfect example. We had a requester who submitted a deletion request, and they had a hyphenated first name. So they submit their name and it's a hyphenated first name. But the backend systems don't accommodate hyphenated first names. So it doesn't match up, and the system fails and the person is denied their right. And of course, then they email the privacy inbox And then we're like, oh, no, they still have a right, even though their parents hyphenated their first name. So you have to go to engineering and say, you got to make this work. And so they have to figure out how to make it work. So again, engineering partners, meeting with them weekly at least, to stay up on what their initiatives are, what their sprint plans are, what's coming up, and how you can help them make this work. The next one is the call center. I can't tell you how valuable the call center is to privacy. One, they know where all the bodies are buried. Two, they know how the business really works. Three, they know who's really in charge. And four, they know your customers better than anybody. And they're incentivized to work with you, because if anything you do goes wrong, they're the ones that get the call. So they have to clean up your mess. And so they make a great partner up front to talk about. If you're new to privacy and or new to the organization, the call center is a great place. And they're also my favorite use testers. Pretend you're a customer and beat on this for a while, please, and come back with how I did this wrong. They are great at that. They're usually very nimble. They usually have a good knowledge base and the ability to spread information among themselves pretty well. They're used to ticketing systems. So often I will use them for, let's say, a right to know / access report, final eyes on the report before it leaves the building. If anybody knows what a customer's data should look like, it's them. They're the best QA that you're going to get. So build a good relationship with them. And often they're resilient and they're tough, but if something is really out of bounds, they're a great ally. They're a great ally to say, privacy and customer service are together on this. This is a bad look. So anyway, they're a great partner. Make friends with them. They are your best ally also when you have to go directly to the customer, right? When you have to go to the data subject and talk to them about something, your solution failed, or this data subject figured out a way around the system. Customer service is who I would usually use to make the call. They're trained, they're good, they have access to the systems, they have good logging, all of that. So I'd use customer service for my customer facing escalations. And then finally, of course, I'm sure you all appreciate the value of good project management, tracking all these requirements, decision logs, process documentation, and escalation logging. So with that, I will open it up to anyone else who wants to throw in for the partners.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think munchkins go a long way in this situation. Bringing in a box of Joe some mornings, making friends that way. Everybody loves a munchkin. Just saying.
All right, Emily, you're up.
All right. Well, I think you can tell from what these two gentlemen have been talking about that privacy is about relationships for sure. And Aaron, if you could go to the next slide for me, that'd be great. Thanks. So relationships are crucial to everything that you will do in your organization as a privacy professional. You will not get anything done with your executive sponsors, with your customer service people, with your legal department, IT, everything, but also with your business units. You need to understand how your business units use personal information. We have some heavy data users, especially in the marketing and sales departments. They are going to want to use and abuse every scrap of personal information they can to eke some money out of anywhere they can eke it out of. So you have the big potential to be the Department of No. And that is something that you really want to try and avoid. And how you do that is building relationships and educating, right? So with your marketing and sales teams, you really want to, this is going to be a lot of investigation for you. Understand what they're doing with their personal information, know what's important to them, right? Like, okay, so if telemarketing isn't super important to you, but email marketing is very important to you. Okay, well, let's figure out how we can get the most out of this email marketing program, still using the principles of data minimization, still understanding that we need to respect people's personal information. We can do what you want to do in an effective way that respects our customers, our employees, and also it provides a great value for the organization. So it's really, you know, engaging business units involves a lot of balance between those legal obligations and that understanding that we still need to run a business here, right? So building those relationships, understanding what's important to these teams, will really help you avoid being the department of no. As you kind of develop these relationships with people, you will start to notice that some people care more. People rise to the top, right? Some people will be that person at the table at a marketing and sales meeting that will say, hey, I'm not 100% sure that we should be using our customers' information in that way. And that's where you start to see your privacy champion program develop. Privacy champion programs, they really are a force multiplier for privacy programs. They can help you as a team of 1 or 2, a person who is overworked, a staff who is under-resourced. They can help you push privacy out into these other business units, especially into these real heavy data user units, and help you to have a more effective privacy program with, you know, within that tight budget, within those legal constraints, within, you know, the capabilities of your organization. And then once you start getting those privacy champions on board, what you can continue, hopefully you can have already started doing some of this, but you can really show the value of privacy as a sales tool, as a business differentiator, right? This is, you know, a few years back, this was a very quaint idea that people actually cared or knew anything about privacy. That is not the case anymore. People know, and they do care. All the studies, you know, that we read, all these consumer indexes, everything, you know, people really do seek out organizations that are treating their personal information with respect and following privacy rules. And they are leaving companies that don't do that. So those are a couple feathers in your cap to really say, like, this privacy thing, it's not just us being sticklers about rules. It is building trust with the world and with our customers and as well with our employees. Moving over to kind of that HR department, they're another huge user of personal information or holder of personal information, right? Employee data is a large portion for a lot of companies of the data that they hold, and oftentimes contains a lot more sensitive personal information as well. So, you know, HR professionals are generally a little more knowledgeable about, because it is a more regulated industry. They do have a lot of rules around what you can keep, what you should keep, how you should protect things within the HR arm of organizations. So they tend to have a greater understanding than maybe your sales and marketing teams do of the importance of keeping personal information safe, because they do have these different obligations that are already put on them for other areas. And then it's important to recognize that a lot of what you're doing is going to be new to people. It's going to feel foreign. It's going to kind of feel like they're not able to do some of the things that they used to do. You know, we know you can't just, you know, take an email address that someone gave us, you know, to provide a email to them and then use it for anything else you want to use it for. That's not something that we should be doing, right? These are changes that people need to get used to. So if you have a change management unit in your organization, be sure to get help from them. Understand how they have done things in the past. You can get a lot of great tips on what will work, their historical knowledge, the things that they have done before. and really start building that awareness of privacy within the organization so that when you make these changes, they are not, you know, out of the blue, that people really understand why you're making them and why it's important, and how it can benefit the whole organization as a whole. Feel free to chime in, guys.
Well, when you were talking about the marketing and sales part, I was reminded of a time I went to a very, very large software gaming company, and every single business unit was a game. And every time they came up with a new game, the chief privacy officer, people would actually see him and turn the other way and walk a different way so that they wouldn't actually walk upon him, because he would ask questions, and classically became the office of no. Then that whole thing of privacy by design started to move into the organization. And as you were talking about, you know, privacy champions within each business unit started to do the, you know, the initial, yeah, gosh, this game tracks people. What's the point of that? So it started to do some of the at least initial triage of the privacy concerns that he was going to have to come in and slap down anyway. So yeah, no, it is
That can be
very
enormously
interesting.
helpful.
You don't want to be the bad guy necessarily. So
I would
You
also
don't have to
add,
be. Yeah.
I'd add here, it's clear that marketing and sales understand that qualified leads are more valuable. And so if the subject of those leads, the data subject of those leads is informed and it's a transparent use and is receptive to the messaging, that's a much more valuable communication. And that is a common ground that you can work with marketing on. Is I actually have some marketing teams that I've turned around, and they're actually kind of, now they're promoting privacy kind of as a brand differentiator. And so those are great discussions to engage with them. To obviously sending an email to someone who is previously unsubscribed, not only is a privacy fail, but it's probably going to be a marketing fail as well. So there's common ground here to be talking to these data users. HR has a lot of reasons for holding the data that it does. And it may be initially resistant to like the CPRA obligations and this new workload, because they're already, their head's already there. So it's really important with the HR, especially if you have a California legal requirement for employees, to work with your HR and to try and use as many existing processes as possible within your solutions. So with that, I'll stop.
all right, should we move on?
Yeah, let's do it. All right. Next up on our agenda here is understanding your role in the data ecosystem. And the reason that is important is because there are different rules. Legally, there are different rules depending upon what your position is in this data ecosystem. So we're going to go over a few options, a few things that you may be. And so we'll start off here with controllers. Controllers really have the most legal obligations out of any of these of controller, processor, sub-processor positions. So when you process personal information for your purposes, you determine the means and the purpose for which that information is being processed. You are the controller. So that means that the majority of the obligations handed down by laws like GDPR, like CPRA, like Utah, Colorado, Connecticut now, all of these obligations, they mostly land on the shoulders of the controller. When you move down to the processor rule, there are some obligations that come directly from legal and regulatory frameworks. However, the bulk of the obligations on processors come from their contract with the controller. So, and it is an obligation on a controller in most privacy or data protection laws that they have a contract with any processor, and that it lays out how they can use the personal information, how long they can retain it, what they do when they're done with it, the purposes for which they can use it. And it prohibits them from using it for a purpose outside of that relationship. There are circumstances where you will be both a controller and a processor. If you are a processor and you have employees, you are also a controller, right? So any data processor that has employees, which I would assume is probably all of them, are going to be both a controller and a processor. This adds some complications because it means that you have different obligations for different areas of your business. In some areas, you're going to be that controller role where all of your obligations come down. In others, you are dictated, your processing is dictated by a contract. Anyone have anything to add about that?
I just mentioned that it's important to be aware of this distinction and to keep your eye out, because sometimes it's surprising what role you're actually fulfilling in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Yep. We also have co-controllers or joint controllers. They're kind of interchangeable terms. And that is a situation where two companies are determining the purpose and means of processing. So if you think about a company that manages a Facebook page, right? So the company that manages the page is collecting personal information that it uses for its purposes, but Facebook is also collecting that personal information that it uses for similar purposes. So they're both controllers in that relationship. And then last but not least, we have sub-processors. So a sub-processor is a company that has a relationship with a processor who then has a relationship with a controller, right? So a sub-processor, oftentimes, you either have to get authorization from the controller before a processor engages a sub-processor, or at least notify the controller, if you're a processor, that you're engaging a sub-processor. So that sub-processor would have the contract with the processor, and that contract most often is required to say, or I think probably always is required to say, you may only handle this personal information per our contract with the controller, right? So those are kind of the different roles that you may be in your data ecosystem. So it's important for you to understand which of those roles you are taking on, for which areas of your business, for which data types that you are processing. Very important to get the scope of your program.
All right, I'll move on. There we go. There. Okay, bill versus buy. This is mine. And really, this is a pretty basic sort of thing. One of the things that I run into a lot in the software privacy tech is that organizations are like, oh, well, we just need a workflow tool, which is totally not necessarily accurate. We've gone from emails and Excel spreadsheets to moving on to tools that can help organizations deal with privacy, data subject access requests, all that sort of thing. And one of the things that you really need to step back and think about is, what's our core business? Is our core business building a privacy workflow tool? Or is it selling shoes, or selling software, or being a consultant? Like if your core business is really, really far away from anything that can do this, don't do it. There are organizations out there that can help you. Some of them are actually quite reasonable in price. Don't do it. But if you're gonna go through the exercise with your IT department, the first part is the culture of the company, the tech culture of the company. Can they really figure this out? Are there people in the IT department that really kind of understand privacy by design, or what privacy impacts are? Or, when Emily was talking before about, the sort of group think, I was thinking about Mad Men, that TV show, and the change. Like, I remember watching the episode where they were eating they had a picnic outside, and they took all the trash and just tossed it. And then I was just like, oh my God. But that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about changes in understanding. Wild West was the internet when it first came out, when I was already pretty old. But, You know, we're talking about changes in perception. We're talking about changes of attitude. You know, we recycle now. We didn't recycle when I was a little kid. These are things that are important. So, culture of company. Can we even figure this out? Because privacy is kind of a big deal. Next, tech abilities of the company, right? There's going to be a whole bunch of tech guys that are going to say, yeah, we can totally do this. We can go, we've got this. This is what we're absolutely got it. They have to do it. They run out of time. Things don't work out. They don't design it the way you wanted it. It becomes shelfware. Total waste of time. You end up buying something anyway. And then finally, the tech bandwidth. Are your tech guys already stretched? I mean, most are. Most are, you know, living in a world where they're like one massive disaster from bringing everything down. I work for plenty of companies that the tech department was always trying to play catch up, always challenged. It was a real stressful environment, and sometimes it's not even worth going to them. Just, you know, really understand your organization's technological abilities, whether there's desire and drive, because if there isn't, just take them, ask them for help, and go out and find the right tool for the job. Anything to add, guys?
Couldn't agree more.
All right, moving right along.
So this next one is, this is just an awareness issue, which is that you're going to have legal requirements. And I've seen some privacy pros go out there and say, the law requires this, the law requires that. And the rest of the company isn't with them. And that is because there are these other program drivers that you should understand. So as Emily talked, you may be a processor and not a controller. And that means that that data processing contract and the revenues that come with it are driving your company. And if you're advocating for privacy changes that are at odds with the contractual obligation, you're going to lose. There's your company's ethic too. How serious is it about following the law? And you need to understand that and take that seriously. Now, you may not publicize that, but you need to understand how much risk your business is willing to take in its competitive environment. You also have a customer care issue, which is how much effort is it going to put in to making your customers happy or satisfied? Minimum requirements, do they want customer delight? Do they not really care? Is the email address broken? That, you know, you have to take that into account. And these are kind of some more practical issues. And then of course, the business strategy, and specifically with the data. What is the long-term strategy with customer data? If you don't at least recognize these, you won't be able to identify who are your true critical stakeholders in the company. What is the order of priority that you should attack issues? And what is the level of effort that the company is willing to devote? If you become the champion for a project that no one else will support, even if on its face it's legally required, your program is doomed to fail. And I've seen it happen. So I just share this with you. Sorry to put that mood here, but I think you have to be aware of the other drivers as a reality check when you're building a program or walking into a program.
Next. All right, here we go. Okay, this is the biggie. So this is sort of designed from the bottom up. So think of it as a privacy risk pyramid, right? Kind of. So the first things are the notice of collection, information use and purpose, disclosure, and sharing. These are really important first parts of your privacy program. You need to understand what your privacy notice says. And you might want to check the date on it too, because if it's older than a year, it needs to be renewed, reviewed. Make sure that if you come into a situation, your privacy notice, make sure you're doing what it says. Because in many cases, nobody really even paid attention to it. They went and they copied something off another website, changed a couple of names, changed a couple of things, put it up. Oh, we're good. But the reality is you actually have to do something about it. Like, you know, I've talked to people like, oh, you serious about that? I'm like, yeah, you can't just put a policy up there, a privacy notice, and like you've got to understand what you're doing. So with all of these things, you need to understand what your company's doing, why, and how. All right. You got to document the categories of personal information that you're collecting. What is the business purpose? And then have you told people what you are going to do with their data? If you haven't, it's not cool to do stuff with it that you're doing with their data. They all need to be disclosed. It needs to be shared with them. You need to be transparent. And then we move to the next level.
Well,
All
I'll
right.
just add one thing about the privacy notice. One thing that I like to say is that the privacy notice is the privacy law you write for yourself, right? So it is something that you can be legally held to show to prove that you are complying with, right? So keep that in mind when you're, hitting the Control-C, Control-V on your computer, because that is something that, if you get challenged against it, you're going to have to show how you're complying with it. So super important point.
Yep. And along that line too, people will ask your customer service about statements in your privacy notice. So
Right.
just be aware that it's out there and it's being used. So mine is this middle tier, the complaints and inbound communications and data subject rights. So I think of these as these are collaborative exercises with other business units within your organization, again, engineering and customer service, and they are data subject communications. So what you never want to miss is a communication from a regulator or the media, and you don't want those handled poorly. So that's just kind of you've got to have a method for identifying those and getting those escalated appropriately. I would always look at your external surfaces. I was just working with a very big client going through their privacy notice. I clicked on the do not sell button and it was broken. It went to nowhere, right? And this is a Fortune 500 company and their do not sell button is broken. So that's low hanging exterior facing fruit that's easy to turn over to a regulator and just say, look what they're doing. So check your inbound communication channels, make sure they're monitored. Data subject rights, of course, make sure that you at least have a way to ingest requests from all appropriate data subjects. They have to have a way to submit those requests. So these are ones that in your first 90 days, I'd definitely be looking at these areas to make sure that you don't have any obvious fails.
Yep. And finally, this kind of overarching idea of enterprise privacy risk, right? So you really want to do that fact-finding work, understand where your gaps are, where your biggest threats are, but additionally, knowing what your organization cares about, right? What's important to them and what is their risk profile, so that you can accurately prioritize those enterprise risks when you find them. And it is really important that you know what mitigation measures you have in place at your disposal, and understand whether you can use those for additional risks and threats. It's important to make sure that you are communicating those up to leadership, because you are generally not the person who's going to decide that we need to mitigate those risks. That is something that you are bubbling up to leadership. So if you continue to bubble that up to leadership, they don't decide to do anything about it. That is their decision to make ultimately. But as long as you have continued that communication and they're aware of it, that is a decision for them to make based on their risk profile, and you have done your job. So getting that up to them is a super important thing, and so start to understand what those methods are, what those mechanisms are, how they want to receive that information, so that you can do that effectively.
Next slide.
You got it.
Here we go.
So this one, this is a list, and it's in order, a logical approach order. If I knew nothing about your company and I was dropped in, this is where I'd start. I'd start in this order. I'd be looking at all of these issues in the order. And this is kind of a takeaway for you that you can kind of test your own internal company's privacy competence by looking at each of these and looking at whether or not it's addressing, it has a method and a process And companies should have a process to address all of these. And every company is on this journey. No company that I've dealt with has completed everything to perfection. It is a continuous journey. You should always have a story on each of these as to when and how you're going to address this.
There we go. Thank you.
Yes,
It is-
everyone. Thank you
Oh,
very much for attending today's session. I want to thank our speakers, Aaron, Emily, and Grant, for their expert tips on surviving your first 90 days and actually finding success. You know, these guys are very approachable. And if you have questions, please use these email addresses to reach out and send them a note, and just they would be happy to respond to you. I'm absolutely certain. There will be a short survey that will be sent out to you automatically in your email. So please fill that out. The webinar will be available online. And just so you know, we're continuing this idea of this first 90-day concept by creating a panel that will be running in September. So we'll be looking for volunteers for that. And Emily and Aaron also work on something called In the Trenches, which is basically a podcast. And it's really focused on folks that are perhaps below director level and what's going to make them successful in their roles and what do they need to know, because so often advice is targeted towards the director or the VP or above, and so it's nice to have practical advice that's usable right that instant. So again, I appreciate everyone's time and attention. Really happy you guys could be here, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you all.